Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GBNews, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GBNews for To The Point.
Good afternoon. You're watching Gloria Piero and Liam Halligan. This afternoon we'll be breaking down Rishi Sunak's budget from business rates to reskilling post-pandemic. But first, it's the news headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock. Let's get you up to date. The mother of two sisters who were murdered by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. Danielle Hussein fatally stabbed Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman last June after he made what he described as a satanic blood pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years. Earlier this week, an independent report also found the Metropolitan Police's response was below the standard it should have been when the girls were initially reported as missing. Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family, but they rejected it. The mother of the two murdered women, Mina Smallman, paid tribute to her daughters after the sentencing.
I think you've heard me say in the past there'll be no celebrations here, but justice has been done. But I think we do need to review that kind of separation. When is someone an adult? And I think it's very disrespectful to say that children can't tell the difference between good and evil.
The businessman who organised the flight that crashed and killed footballer Emiliano Sala has been found guilty of endangering the safety of an aircraft. David Henderson, who's 67, was convicted by a jury at Cardiff Crown Court early this morning. The small plane carrying the 28-year-old Sala crashed into the English Channel in January 2019. The UK government has threatened to retaliate should France impose sanctions on British fishing vessels after a trawler was detained. French authorities said that two British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre on Wednesday. It is the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, said threats to block British boats from French ports and tighten checks appear to breach international law. He also confirmed officials are investigating the circumstances surrounding French action in the Channel.
What I've been able to establish so far is that in respect of that vessel, they were on the list that was provided by the MMO initially to the European Union. The European Union therefore did grant a licence. We are seeing some reports that for some reason they were subsequently withdrawn from the list. It's unclear why that might have been at the moment.
Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. That's the conclusion of the Resolution Foundation's analysis of the Chancellor's autumn budget. Well, they found that households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, including those announcements yesterday. The Chancellor says his ambition is to lower taxes. He announced an extra £150 billion for public services, tax cuts for businesses, extra cash for hospitals, a softening of the cut to universal credit and a freeze for fuel duty. The Office for Budget Responsibility says the plans will take public spending to the highest share of the economy since the late 1970s. The Institute for Fiscal Studies Director, Paul Johnson, told GB News that despite the upbeat tone of the Chancellor, real pain will be felt by low-income households because of inflation.
On living standards, the Chancellor's presentation was upbeat. He claimed beforehand this was a budget to usher in a new age of optimism. But unfortunately for him and for us, the outlook for living standards doesn't match that upbeat tone. Over the next several years, a combination of tax increases and high inflation will mean very slow growth in living standards. A middle earner is likely to be worse off next year than this, as high rates of inflation and tax rises more than negate small average wage increases.
Extinction Rebellion protesters have broken into an oil refinery in Hampshire, demanding that the UK government stops all fossil fuel investments. Two British Olympians, Laura Baldwin and Etienne Scott, are demonstrating with them. The protesters are using these pink boats to blockade the main entrance to the ExxonMobil Fawley refinery. Well, we've spoken to ExxonMobil today and they said, our focus includes reducing our emissions. They added, we respect the right to peaceful protest, but our priority is the safety of our people. Well, ExxonMobil Fawley, they say, continues to operate safely and is not experiencing any impact on production. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Back now to Gloria and Liam.
Welcome back to the Budget Breakdown with me, Liam Halligan, and of course, Gloria Piero. Coming up today.
As Rishi Sunak announces cuts to business rates in England, we're asking whether the Northern Ireland Executive will follow suit.
Plus, does the Chancellor's speech do enough to help those wanting to re-skill after the pandemic? We'll be speaking to Tom Bowick, Chief Executive of the Federation of Awarding Bodies, to get his take on this important subject.
But it's not just our guests we want to hear from. As ever, we want to hear from you. Get in touch by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Before we continue with our budget breakdown, let's get a little bit more on the sentencing of Daniel Hussein. The 19-year-old was convicted of murdering sisters Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman after making, apparently, a satanic blood pact.
Earlier today, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years. We can go live now to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who is live at the Old Bailey. Mark, bring us up to date with the latest.
Well, Daniel Hussein has now been taken off to prison to begin that life sentence. The judge ruling that he should serve at least 35 years in prison before he is even considered for parole. This is a young man who couldn't be given a whole life tariff, in other words, that he would spend the rest of his life in jail because he was under the age of 21 at the time of the killings. He was just 18, just a couple of days after his 18th birthday. Today, in court, he appeared via video link from Belmarsh Prison and he remained arrogant throughout. He refused to look at the camera. He sat perched on a seat sideways on to the camera, staring out of the window at Belmarsh Prison, refusing to engage with the judge as she handed down that sentence. And that really was his demeanour throughout the trial as well, back in July, where he would sit in the dock and he'd often be seen smiling and nodding at members of Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman's family. Really traumatic for them and only compounded the pain and the grief that they felt about what was a horrific case. I've been looking back at this very disturbing case. Armed with taser stun guns, the moment police move in to arrest killer Daniel Hussein.
Mate, you're under arrest. Come out of your dress. Keep walking towards me. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are, stay where you are, stay where you are. Hands on your head, stay where you are. Face me. Hands on your head, stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
He is, it's clear, completely unfazed. A cold, callous young man who just weeks earlier murdered two sisters in a frenzied knife attack. Part, we're told, of a bizarre pact with the devil. This is one of the last images of Hussein's victims, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, a selfie taken by them minutes before they were murdered. The sisters had been with a group of friends on the 5th of June last year, celebrating Biba's birthday. As the friends drifted off home, Biba and Nicole stayed on in the Friant Country Park, dancing late into the night, until coming face to face with their killer, who stabbed them dozens of times. Their bodies were discovered almost 2 days later by Nicole's boyfriend, as family and friends launched their own search for the missing sisters, frustrated by the slow police response. After the police watchdog this week criticised that initial response as below standard, Scotland Yard Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family. The victim's mother said the time for apologies had long gone. It is yet another deeply uncomfortable moment for the Met boss.
This brings more pressure on the Met and on the Commission's position. The way they dealt with the missing person report and how they investigated it was insufficient. They've apologised for that. But week after week, we're seeing more pressure brought on the Met. Different apologies coming out. The Commission's position under threat all the time. They've got an awful lot of work to do to rebuild trust and confidence in police in London.
Can she survive?
I think she'll survive for 2 more years. I think she's determined to see this job through.
Do you have any injuries? Yeah. The wrists from the cuffs? No. Oh.
In police custody, Hussein still had injuries to his right hand, deep cuts he sustained while stabbing Biba and Nicole.
Is this the interview? No, that's a question. The injuries on your fingers. What happened there?
Detectives pieced together his movements on the night of the murders. This is him arriving back at his father's house near the park. His blood-stained trousers removed, the injured hand tucked into the jacket tied around his waist. The blood from that injured hand was found all over the crime scene. This is Daniel Hussein in an Asda supermarket in the days before the murders, buying the block of knives he'd go on to use in the attack. And in a search of his mother's home, police uncovered a far more sinister aspect to this crime: satanic symbols in his bedroom. And nearby, a handwritten letter. It was a deal with the devil, a promise to kill 6 women every 6 months. It was signed in his own blood. In return, he believed he'd win the lottery and have better luck with women. Search teams even found receipts for lottery tickets purchased in the days after the murders. It's not known why the sisters were targeted. This is Biba and Nicole in a local co-op buying food and drink shortly before heading to Friant Park. Tragically, they may simply have been in the wrong place at the wrong time when Hussein discovered them. As horrific as these murders undoubtedly were, for the sisters' family and friends, there is the added trauma, not just of the initial lacklustre police response, but in learning that 2 officers who should have been guarding the scene were arrested and then later charged with taking selfies next to the bodies. Those 2 officers are due to appear at the Old Bailey next week. Their lawyers have indicated they intend to plead guilty. But for now, Daniel Hussein is beginning life behind bars for the murder of Biba and Nicole, 2 sisters who'd simply been relishing life and celebrating their freedom from lockdown. Mark White, GB News at the Old Bailey.
Well, moving on to the budget now. Yesterday, Chancellor Rishi Sunak laid out the government's tax and spending plans for the year ahead. One key feature of the speech was the change to business rates.
I'm announcing today, for 1 year, a new 50% business rates discount for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Pubs, music venues, cinemas, restaurants, hotels, theatres and gyms. Any eligible business can claim a discount on their bills of 50% up to a maximum of £110,000. That is a business tax cut worth almost £1.7 billion. Together with small business rate relief, this means that over 90% of all retail, hospitality and leisure businesses will see a discount of at least 50%. Apart from the COVID reliefs, this is the biggest single-year tax cut to business rates in over 30 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, taken together, today's budget cuts business rates by £7 billion.
So that was the Chancellor yesterday announcing a temporary 1 year, 50% cut in business rates up to a maximum of £110,000. And that's only for retailers and gyms and other similar establishments. It's not for factories that invest, for companies that are badly hit by the pandemic. And it's crucial to mention also that these changes only affect firms in England. But now business groups in Northern Ireland are hoping the same thing will happen in Northern Ireland after Rishi Sunak's statement.
Joining us now is Daniel Donnelly from the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. Welcome, Daniel. Daniel, what are you hearing about what the Northern Ireland Executive hopes to do to help small businesses?
Well, good afternoon. When you're in Northern Ireland watching the budget, can be a bit like watching someone else opening their Christmas presents. There's lots of stuff which is brought forward, which affects business is devolved. So, as you've correctly highlighted, issues like business rates and skills, childcare, all issues where there was positive moves yesterday. But yes, it's very much up to the Northern Ireland Executive about how they decide to move forward on those particular areas. So what we do know is that Northern Ireland, as a result of these new spending commitments in England, Northern Ireland is receiving a lot more in terms of resource spending, so day-to-day spending for the Northern Ireland Executive to use. There's a little bit of a live debate between the Treasury and the Finance Ministry here in terms of how much is available, and it's largely a technical argument about how those figures are calculated. But certainly from our perspective, representing SMEs in Northern Ireland, we want to see positive action on business rates. During COVID, there's been lots of positive measures in terms of rates discounts. So currently in this financial year, retail, hospitality, leisure, childcare and others have 100% rates discount, which is really positive. What we don't want to see is when the rate bills are set for the following year, that's sort of back to a pre-pandemic so-called normal. We need to recognise the changing nature of high streets, how the pandemic and changing practices have altered that. So we certainly hope that business rates is high on the agenda in terms of the next Northern Ireland budget.
I think you've explained it beautifully there, Daniel, if I may say so. Those SME companies, small and medium-sized enterprises, they hate business rates because you pay business rates before you've made any money, before you've made a single pound of turnover, taken any revenue at all. And I think it's worth explaining, isn't it, that the detail of Rishi Sunak's announcement yesterday, this is a 50% reprieve on business rates for 1 year only for retailers and similar establishments. And then there's another 12-month reprieve if a company invests in itself and buys a new piece of equipment or builds an extension or something, that increase in business rates reflecting that enhanced valuation doesn't kick in for 12 months. Even if the executive in your part of the UK follows suit, it's pretty small beer.
Well, I don't think we should dismiss it either. It's positive that there has been some action, and it does show that the Chancellor has been listening. I also understand from my colleagues across the water in FSB UK, there's been a cancellation of the multiplier, which also affects broadly more businesses than retail and hospitality and so on. So there is some further discount for those particular businesses. But we have a different rate system here, different devolved policy. I believe, if I'm right, this year that the executive was actually more ambitious in other parts of the UK in terms of having 100% discount for certain sectors. We want to see our executive being as ambitious as possible in terms of recognising businesses. And you're right to say that business rates, it's a very blunt instrument. It doesn't really take into account the profitability or otherwise of a business. It's an old-fashioned property tax. Property is easy to tax, I'm afraid, but really going forward, we need more substantial reform and a better look in terms of the actual real-life circumstances of that business rather than just simply looking at what property it occupies.
The Chancellor announced big increases in the minimum wage. How will that impact on small businesses? Is that something your members are worried about?
Well, unlike issues like rates, the minimum wage is actually set right across the UK, so it's applicable to our members as well. I think many workers will rightly be happy they got an additional pay rise, and many of those workers have been on the front line during COVID. Well, in many cases, very, very well deserved. Just from our point of view, we don't think that the government has done enough to offset that rising cost and the rising cost which businesses are facing generally in terms of energy and supply chain and labour costs and so on. We think more could have been done on the employment allowance. I think upgrading that would have allowed businesses some reprieve in terms of their national insurance costs and would have made creating and sustaining jobs more achievable and more attractive. So we think there's more work to be done there in terms of assisting businesses in light of the additional costs which they're facing.
Of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. And Daniel, I can reveal I'm planning a trip to Northern Ireland soon, and I want to cover some interesting business stories in Northern Ireland. And our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, may even be coming with me, so we'll be back in touch with you.
They're leaving me here.
That's why we're going.
Stay with us, as after the break we're hearing from Tom Bowick, Chief Executive of the Federation of Awarding Bodies, on the importance of reskilling in a post-pandemic world. See you in a minute. First, it's the weather.
Hello again. Exceptional amounts of rain have fallen across Cumbria during the last 24 hours, and there'll be further heavy rain in places through the rest of today with the risk of flooding. Elsewhere, there will be some dry weather about in the southeast and to the northwest away from this weather front, and it'll be very mild. These southwesterly winds are bringing very mild air, but also bringing a lot of moisture. That moisture now being dumped across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, Wales, and increasingly through the rest of today, parts of the southwest. But the main focus for the time being remains on Cumbria, where an amber warning is still in force because of the risk of an additional 50 to 100 millimetres of rainfall on top of the in excess of 300 millimetres that some western fells have already seen. Risk of flooding here. Also further rain to come for parts of southern and eastern Scotland, and increasingly through the rest of the day, Wales and the southwest will see heavy rain set in, but it's drier towards the east of England, as well as for northern and western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. A few showers here, some brighter spells through the day, clear spells overnight. But through the night, these outbreaks of rain become more showery and they become more extensive across parts of England, Wales, Scotland. A mild night to come, so not a cold start to the day tomorrow, but a wet start in places. Further heavy rain coming through. It does ease for a time across northern England before another spell pushes into southwest Scotland, and showers return for much of England as well as Wales during the afternoon. But eventually something a little drier and brighter appears into Northern Ireland, West Wales, as well as Cornwall and Devon. And it's another mild day to come, but it is going to turn colder from the west through Friday and into the weekend. The last of the rain pulling away from northeast Scotland, eastern England on Friday evening. But further showers head in for Friday night across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. And that means that the weekend will remain highly changeable with further rain or showers, strong winds at times as well, and it will turn colder.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
Welcome back. You're watching Piero and Halligan. Lots of you have been getting in contact with your views on the budget announcements yesterday.
Mark says by the time taxes may be reduced, the cost of living will be quite a bit higher. So whatever happens, we'll be worse off. And let's not forget COP26, as things could become really stretched.
Alex has been in touch to say Chinese growth is set to fall to around 6% next year. Does the Chancellor really think we'll do similar or better? Madness.
That's a really good point, blimey. And Elaine says, money thrown at welfare keeps us in a weak place of dependency on the state, leaving us poor. Money for wealth creation stirs us with aspirations and a richness in our hearts, minds and pockets. I felt the budget was heavily weighted to the former.
Thank you all for your emails. We really do enjoy hearing from you.
And as well as slashing business rates, Rishi Sunak announced in his budget he'd be cutting universal credit taper, changing alcohol tax duties and increasing public spending.
Whilst many of these changes will have a positive impact, one area that Rishi Sunak failed to highlight was help for those wanting to reskill post-pandemic.
As a result, some argue that Rishi Sunak's budget fails to tackle the huge intergenerational divide evidenced in further education. And to discuss that, we've got Tom Buick. He's Chief Executive of the Federation of Awarding Bodies. So that's the sort of collective voice that brings together training in the UK and awards qualifications.
Represents all the exam boards, all the qualifications bodies, in the UK.
So yesterday in our budget show, Gloria and I, we were talking about, there's a £3.5 billion skills package for post-16 education. Was there?
Well, it sounds impressive, and no wonder the government wanted to pre-brief this and get this out over the weekend. I mean, give some credit to the Department for Education in terms of their baseline funding, £3.8 billion, very impressive. It's a 26% increase on where they were in 2019. So looking at it, though, from the perspective of, say, for example, the last year of the Labour government, 2009-2010, in terms of per student funding in further education, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has just come out and said it's 10% less per student.
Wow.
And in fact, if we were investing, this is public investment, in what we were in the back end of the 2000s, the first decade, actually would be investing £750 million more in further education, that's colleges and training providers, than we are now. So when you look at it in that context, I'd argue that what was announced by Rishi Sunak yesterday, important investment, but it's a skills pea shooter. It's not the bazooka that we need to actually solve many of these skills and productivity gaps in our economy.
And let's have a look at what he announced on the Skills Fund. He said that £550 million for adult skills in England would be invested in the Skills Fund by 2024-25 to offer short courses and skills boot camps for adults who have no qualifications beyond GCSE level. It sounds good.
Yeah, of course, that's really welcome. It's a ring-fence fund, as you say, £550 million. But again, going back a decade and a half, the Labour government set up the Basic Skills Agency. There was the Klaus-Moser report that found that one in five adults couldn't locate a plumber in a telephone directory. Never mind they could get a plumber then, in terms of some of the skill shortages was a separate issue. But the point is, this basic skills challenge has been with us now for decades. And in a way, you know, this investment, this £3.8 billion, of course it's welcome, but it's investment to stand still, right? And as a British economy, we've still got this underlying disease where it's not just about the public investment, it's the fact that employers, according to the Labour Force survey, are spending £2 billion a year less since 2015 on the job training, on workforce training. So you've got a perfect storm. Employers are actually pulling back from on-the-job investment. And we've had since 2017 the apprenticeship levy. Again, it's great that there's £2.5 billion, uprated, by the way, to £2.7 billion. But that's just an inflationary increase from 2017. That's not additional money for apprenticeships. Meanwhile, what have we seen since 2017 for a programme that, after all, was designed for young people? It was about getting people on the first rung of that career entry ladder. The way the levy is being spent, we've seen a collapse, actually, 44% collapse in young people under 25 getting an apprenticeship place. Meanwhile, employers have used the levy, many of them, to spend on senior management training. I mean, would you believe it? The apprenticeship levy can be used to, actually, you can spend it fully on an MBA at Cranfield University. That's what some senior executives have done. So I think yesterday was a missed opportunity by the Chancellor to review the operation of the apprenticeship levy, look at its scope, look at the design. Is it really helping our young people to get these jobs?
You know what, Tom? Whenever you talk about economics, in the end, you've got to address the P word, productivity. Sure. In the end, if we're going to grow by 3, 4, 5, 6%, it's all about productivity. That's like the efficiency of the economy. Yeah. And that's about not just investing in equipment and capital plant and so on. Over and above everything, I think productivity is about skills. And we can see in the labour market, we've got a proper skills shortage now. That's why you've got these supply chain issues. It's not just HGV drivers, it goes right across the piece. We've lagged the Germans and other West European countries for many years in terms of our skills bank of talent, if you like. When is that going to end? I've been a journalist for a long time now, and all we ever talk about is, we've got to up our skills. When's it really going to happen?
Yeah, because every time we have this debate, and by the way, we've been having this debate for decades, you know, and it goes all the way back, actually, to the 1890s and Bismarck, you know, when Germany was powering ahead with its industrial training system. The trouble is, it's the UK Treasury that has this attitude of never quite coming to the party with, as I say, with a bazooka of investment. And that's not just about public taxpayer spend, it's about ensuring that employers also invest. So, for example, they could have
make training spending tax deductible, for instance.
Yes.
Okay.
So they never quite come up with the overall package, public and private, that is going to get us to those German and Swiss level styles of investment. And that's why I call it a pea shooter rather than the bazooka that we actually need. We are running to stand still when it comes to investment in our skills training, when in fact what we need is that skills escalator from entry level, the basic skills challenge, of course, right up through our apprenticeship system to management leadership.
And on apprenticeships and how they might fit into the levelling up agenda, I was very conscious when I represented a former Red Wall seat that not only was university participation right near the bottom of constituencies, high quality apprenticeships in that constituency are also very, very low compared to cities. Is there, I mean, I haven't been an MP for a couple of years. Is there any improvement on that?
Well, potentially there is some improvement with the idea of these T-levels. You know, these are new flagship qualifications in 24 occupational sectors that could, in some of these constituencies, like former Red Wall constituencies, provide those young people with a learning and earning route. It's a full-time study programme, but it has a 45-day industry placement. And the idea is that it will actually help people into skilled employment. No one would disagree, I think, with the ambitions. However, I mean, we've done some analysis at the Federation of Awarding Bodies on the rollout of T-levels between now and 2025. And guess what? Actually, where some of the biggest gaps of provision, not least because, again, employers aren't stepping up with the industry placements, they're in those former Red Wall constituencies. So you start to see, with the lack of investment in full-time FE students, with potentially a very patchy rollout of the new technical level, the T-level programme across the country, the government's own impact assessment of the skills bill, for example, shows that it's the most disadvantaged groups that are going to miss out in this so-called skills revolution.
Well, let's hope there's proper change and the UK economy can upskill. Tom Buick, of the Chief Exec of the Federation of Awarding Bodies, thanks for joining us here on GB News. Still to come, we'll be hearing my Money Talks interview when I interviewed John Mills, the founder of JML, a retailer which employs hundreds of people.
But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The mother of two sisters who were murdered by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. Daniel Hussein fatally stabbed Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman last June after he made what he described a satanic blood pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years. Earlier this week, an independent report also found the Metropolitan Police's response was below the standard it should have been when the girls were initially reported as missing. Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family, but they rejected it. The UK government has threatened to retaliate should France impose sanctions on British fishing vessels after a trawler was detained. French authorities said that 2 British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre on Wednesday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, said threats to block British boats from French ports and tighten checks appear to breach international law. The businessman who organised the flight that crashed and killed footballer Emiliano Sala has been found guilty of endangering the safety of an aircraft. David Henderson was convicted by a jury at Cardiff Crown Court early this morning. The small plane carrying 28-year-old Salah crashed into the English Channel, killing the player and the plane's pilot, David Ibbotson, in January 2019. Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. Well, that's according to analysis from the Resolution Foundation. They're looking at the Chancellor's autumn budget. They say households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became the Prime Minister. That includes Wednesday's budget. The Chancellor says his ambition is to lower taxes. He announced an extra £150 billion for public services, tax cuts for businesses, extra cash for hospitals, a softening of the cut to universal credit and a freeze for fuel duty. The Office for Budget Responsibility said the plans will take public spending to the highest share of the economy since the late 1970s. You're up to date. I'll have more on all of today's top stories for you at 3 o'clock.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
Welcome back to the Budget Breakdown with Gloria Piero and me, Liam Halligan.
Coming up today, as Rishi Sunak announces cuts to business rates in England, we're asking whether the Northern Ireland executive would follow suit.
Plus, does the Chancellor's speech do enough to those wanting to reskill after the pandemic?
We've been bombarded with emails, and hundreds of you have been writing in to give us your thoughts on the budget.
Here's Maureen. What does she say? She says this. What's in this budget for the elderly? Nothing except higher costs and the smashing of the triple lock. Why would I ever vote Tory?
Barbara says instead of helping the work-shy, the strivers should be recognised more. If people are genuinely incapable of working hard through disability or age, they should be helped. Otherwise, why are they living on welfare? We, the long-suffering taxpayers, are sick of subsidising fit and able idlers.
And Emily says many pub owners have said they will not be able to pass on the tiny cuts in beer duty, and some may actually be putting the price of pints up to cover increased costs.
Thank you for all your emails. Your opinions really do matter to us.
Now it's time for me to bring you and Gloria.
Looking forward to it.
She says all the right things. My daily interview series, and here it is. Do you want to say it?
Money Talks. Thank you. It's a privilege.
She doesn't care. She says she does. She doesn't care. Do you care?
I care.
Right, Money Talk.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm going to test you on this afterwards. Right, I'm going to test you. Now, during the years I've spent as an economics journalist, I've met many interesting business leaders. One of the most thoughtful, in all seriousness, is John Mills, who set up and owns a retailer called JML, which employs hundreds of people, turns over tens of millions of pounds every year and sells mainly household goods, often via shopping channels all over the world. Mills is genuinely one of the UK's most experienced and respected importer-exporters. He's also a trained economist, and his many essays and books on economic policy are influential across Westminster, Whitehall and beyond. And on top of all that, perhaps unusually for a business titan, John Mills is the Labour Party's biggest private donor. Only the trade unions fund the party to a greater extent. He's often appeared on The Money as a panellist, so I thought it was time I sat down for a proper Money Talks chat with John Mills. John Mills, it's a pleasure to see you, as ever. We've talked a lot about economics over the years, you and I. You are a very influential economist in government circles, within the Labour Party as well. You've been intervening in our economic debate with papers and speeches for many years. But you're basically at heart a businessman, aren't you? So tell me about your business, when you started it and the operation you have now.
Well, I'm an economist by background, but I've always earned a living in the commercial world. I was involved in manufacturing for about 25 years, but that fell apart in the 1980s when the exchange rate got so high it was just impossible to operate. And ever since then I've been involved in buying and selling all over the world, but with goods made in the Far East. And the fact that you can get things done so much more cheaply in the Far East compared to what it costs to get goods manufactured in the West has got a lot to colour my views about what ought to be done about economic policy. So the two have linked together really quite importantly.
And what kind of a business is JML? What does it do and at what
Essentially
scale?
what it sells is high-volume consumer products, all of which require some sort of point-of-sale explanation, which is the kind of unique factor. And we sell in stores, we sell direct to the final consumer, we sell internationally. It's all driven by audio-visual films. And it's a kind of niche business which this sort of kind of business operates all over the world, but we're really the leaders in the UK.
So you sell basically by shopping channels around the world, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, we do sell in a lot of shopping channels. I think at last count it's about 70 different countries. Of course, once you've got a film that really works and sells the product, then everybody wants it.
And what sort of products do you sell, John?
Household products, electrical, DIY products, health and beauty, the sort of stuff that you see in big stores all over the place. But they're all products that require some sort of explanation at the point of sale, so that's the unique factor about them.
And can you give us an idea of the extent of your turnover, the number of people you employ, the ownership of the company?
I still own about 80% of the company. We've got about 240 employees. The turnover's it's around about 70-odd million at the moment. It came down a little bit because we used to have a lot of foreign subsidiaries which we got rid of, so the turnover came down a little bit. But it's been pretty steadily profitable over the last 25, 30 years.
Tell us how your business experiences, John, your manufacturing experience in the 80s, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, have shaped your view of how economies work.
Well, I certainly have a pretty strong view about what makes economies grow. And I think that the main drivers of economic growth are actually quite a narrow range of investment opportunities around mechanisation and technology and power. And my involvement in getting products made all over the place gave me a real insight to how powerful and how effective these sorts of investments can be, what huge amounts of additional output they can produce over really quite a short period of time, compared to lots of other sorts of investment in housing and schools and hospitals, road and rail, where actually the returns are very low. You're never going to get the economy to grow very quickly by investing in these sort of things. And that's true also for a lot of the private sector as well, in shopping malls and office blocks and IT. It just doesn't produce much in the way of economic growth. What does is this narrow range of opportunities around technology, mechanisation and power. And my experience of running a business and actually having to get products made is what drove me towards that conclusion.
And what happened with your manufacturing career in the 80s? What were you making and where?
We're making very much the same sort of products as we sell now, but we were making them in the UK rather than in China. And the cost base in those days, I mean, the exchange rate went up enormously in the early 1980s, around about 70%, at the same time as China was devaluing, and the gap just widened.
That means exports got hammered, right?
Exports got absolutely hammered. Importing became ridiculously cheap. At the same time as, and cheaper and cheaper as China devalued by 75% between 1980 and 1993. And the cost of goods from China just halved compared to what it was in the West. And the difference was just astronomical.
Tell us about, John, your thoughts on Britain as a manufacturer. But before we come on to your policy recommendations, which I'm keen to go into in detail, but what are your thoughts on Britain as a manufacturer? We're still, I think, 8th or 9th in the world in the list of leading manufacturers. Manufacturing still employs, many thousands of people in this country, often on good wages, in parts of the country where it's quite hard to get high-waged jobs. Do you think we're still a world-class manufacturer? Can our manufacturing sector grow as a share of our national income in the years ahead?
Well, I think we do have some firms which are world-class, which have survived really well. Some of them are just really very well managed. Some of them are in niches. So it's not a total disaster area. But what has happened is the proportion of our national income coming from manufacturing has gone down from about nearly a third as late as 1970 to about 9% now. And if anything, it's still drifting down. So, the writing's really on the wall, and although manufacturing is still quite an important part of the UK economy, we're growing much more slowly than other places in the world. So the UK manufacturing as a proportion of total world manufacturing has sunk down and down and down. Even as late as 1950, on some measures, about 25% of all manufactured exports came from the UK factories. Now it's about 2%. I mean, that gives you some idea.
Unbelievable, 25% worldwide.
Yeah, to 2%. I mean, it gives you some idea of the catastrophic reduction there's been, and how we're still dawdling along, growing now at maybe 1% per annum, compared to 7 or 8% in the Far East.
We'll talk about macroeconomics in a moment, but what else do you think we need to do to tweak the policy levers in order to enhance our manufacturing performance in the years ahead?
Well, there is a supply side agenda which is familiar to everybody, on education and training, patient capital, more money spent on R&D and all this kind of thing. My analysis is that at best, in a slow-moving economy, can produce an increase in GDP of about 0.5% per annum.
It's quite modest.
Very small. And also, if you invest in the relatively low-return areas which I referred to earlier on, like schools, hospitals, road, rail, office blocks and so on, you're getting a return of maybe 5% per annum. So even if you had 10% of your economy devoted to it, gives you 0.5% growth. What really drives the economy is this narrow range, and this is what produced the change that generated the Industrial Revolution, is this narrow range of investment opportunities with much, much higher returns, technology, mechanisation and power. And my concern about the British economy is that most of that sort of investment finds its natural home in the light industry, which tends to be owned by the private sector, involved in international trading, and this is just what gets trounced if the exchange rate is too high. And I think it's too strong an exchange rate that's really been the undoing of British manufacturing.
You have written about this for many years, haven't you? So tell us about your ideas on how we need to run the macroeconomy differently in order to engender more growth. Since the global financial crisis, Britain's grown by 1.5% a year on average, as opposed to 2.5%. That makes an enormous difference. It makes an enormous difference to our living standards as our population grows. Yeah. It makes an enormous difference to our national accounts. There's a lot more red ink on the Exchequer's balance sheet when you're only growing at 1 to 1.5%.
I think that's right. And just as a precursor on that, I mean, I think we've got some very expensive problems coming down the track on climate change, on healthcare, on social care, on restoring training cuts, on pensions, all of which are going to impact on people's incomes. And unless we can get the economy to grow more quickly, I think we're really facing a period of falling incomes, which is going to be very difficult to overcome. So I do think getting the growth rate up is really very, very important. But I think the only way we're going to do this Yes, by getting new industrial capacity installed in the UK. And I think that to get the economy back to any sort of reasonable balance, what we need to do is to get the proportion of GDP coming from manufacturing up from about 9% where it is at the moment, probably to around about 15%. Not necessarily as high as Germany or Japan or Singapore, because we've got a very strong service sector with about a 5% of GDP export surplus every year. So we're very strong on that. And you know, we need to make sure we maintain that strength. But we need manufacturing to fill the gap.
And your big thought is about the exchange rate, isn't it? So tell us how you think a stronger pound damages our manufacturing sector and what you would do about it, John.
Well, I think the reason it damages it is because it means that the rate at which we're charging out all our overhead costs is too high for the rest of the world to shoulder. And the fact that that's the case is shown dramatically by our drop in share of world trade, which has gone down from, including services and everything else, about 10% to 2.5% over the last 30 or 40 years. Huge drop there. And also because manufacturing as a proportion of our GDP has gone down and down as well. And it's manufacturing which tends to produce the increases in productivity which drive living standards. So if you have very little in the way of manufacturing capacity, you finish up with a very low growth rate. And I think we're facing a period, if we're not very careful, where our growth rate, once we recover from COVID, is going to be 1% or something per annum. And with all these additional costs coming down the track, we're going to be in really bad shape.
In recent years, the pound has bobbed around between roughly $1.20, $1.30, $1.40, somewhere around there. Where do you think the pound should be, and how would you get it there?
Well, I think that for manufacturing, if you're going to have a manufacturing revival, you've got to get the pound way down to roughly parity with the dollar. The problem we've got in the British economy is that the service sector, which is not terribly price sensitive, and where we've got all sorts of natural advantages in our language, our geography, our universities, and our trained labour force, that can exist quite happily at $1.50 or something to the pound. Manufacturing can't. And we've got this difference between the two sides of the economy which require different treatments. Now, the reason why I think we should give priority to manufacturing is because services are difficult to sell in sufficient quantity throughout the world. Manufacturing is much easier. If we're going to get the economy rebalanced, the way to fill the gap is not to try and do it on sales of services, but to do it on manufactured goods.
So what active steps would you take to lower the value of the pound? Pretend I'm Rishi Sunak and you've got an audience with me and you want to convey the world according to John Mills. And let's say that the Chancellor accepts your view that the pound does need to be a bit weaker. How do we go about it?
Well, there's a number of things you can do. First of all, if you have a balance of payments deficit, which we have year after year after year, this has to be matched by a capital surplus. And the capital surplus tends to come from selling off British assets, companies in particular. We've just had Morrison's being sold for whatever it is. You know, all that kind of thing just pushes up the exchange rate. So you could put some sort of public interest test at the very least.
So you'd be much more stringent about allowing the sales of British firms to overseas investors?
Yes. You could have a withholding tax which made holding British assets less attractive. You could have a wealth fund like Norway did.
A sovereign wealth fund, yeah.
A sovereign wealth fund that China did. One of the ways in which China got the growth, the exchange rate down, was to have a huge wealth fund. It's the biggest in the world, well over $2 trillion worth. And we could do that. You could get the Bank of England instructed to keep the exchange rate down rather than keep it up. There's a whole range of different things you could do. And, you know, the fact is that lots of other countries in the world do this all the time. And Japan, for example, between about 2011 and 2013, they got the exchange rate down by about a third by doing exactly the sort of things I've been talking about. So it's not impossible. What you need is a complete change of attitude by the authorities as to what the target for the exchange rate should be. At the moment, we don't have a target.
How much of Germany's economic prowess when it comes to manufacturing do you think is explained by the fact that Germany's in the euro and thus its exchange rate is much, much lower than it would be if Germany was still operating standalone with just the Deutschmark?
Well, I think that's exactly what the situation is. And as a result of the enormously competitive export that Germany's got, all the southern states in Europe can't compete.
because the exchange rate is too high for them.
Far too high
but
for them.
But it's wonderfully low for Germany, so its exports are very, very competitive.
But the trouble with Germany is that the result of all this is that the German export markets go to pieces. And as a result of this, although the Germans have got a huge export surplus,
9-10% of GDP,
ridiculously high. Actually, it's not growing very fast because Spain and Italy and Greece are all in very bad shape.
And that was John Mills.
You're welcome.
Enjoy it?
That was, do you know, I said it to you actually. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves could do a lot worse than sitting alongside
He's so proud of his support for the Labour Party.
Business person.
And you can hear the full-length version of that interview with John Mills on my Money Talks podcast on the GB News YouTube channel or via Money Talks on Apple iTunes.
You've been watching Piero and Halligan on GB News. We're back together on Monday at 2. Thank you for watching. You're cooking me tea on Saturday, aren't you?
Don't tell them. Who's up next?
It's Darren McCaffrey.
Darren McCaffrey, hooray!
Hello again. Exceptional amounts of rain have fallen across Cumbria during the last 24 hours, and there'll be further heavy rain in places through the rest of today with the risk of flooding. Elsewhere, there will be some dry weather about in the southeast and to the northwest away from this weather front, and it'll be very mild. These southwesterly winds are bringing very mild air, but also bringing a lot of moisture. That moisture now being dumped across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, Wales, and increasingly through the rest of today, parts of the southwest. But the main focus for the time being remains on Cumbria, where an amber warning is still in force because of the risk of an additional 50 to 100 millimetres of rainfall on top of the in excess of 300 millimetres that some western fells have already seen. Risk of flooding here. Also further rain to come for parts of southern and eastern Scotland, and increasingly through the rest of the day, Wales and the southwest will see heavy rain set in, but it's drier towards the east of England, as well as for northern and western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. A few showers here, some brighter spells through the day, clear spells overnight. But through the night, these outbreaks of rain become more showery and they become more extensive across parts of England, Wales, Scotland. A mild night to come, so not a cold start to the day tomorrow, but a wet start in places. Further heavy rain coming through. It does ease for a time across northern England before another spell pushes into southwest Scotland and showers return for much of England as well as Wales during the afternoon. But eventually something a little drier and brighter appears into Northern Ireland, West Wales, as well as Cornwall and Devon. And it's another mild day to come, but it is going to turn colder from the west through Friday and into the weekend. The last of the rain pulling away from northeast Scotland, eastern England on Friday evening. But further showers head in for Friday night across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. And that means that the weekend will remain highly changeable with further rain or showers, strong winds at times as well, and it will turn colder.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7pm for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8pm weekdays on GB News.